My name's Sean Hawthorne, and I'm the owner of One Life Health and Wellness. And I'm sitting here with my friend Darryl Borsato. He's a client and a friend of mine. And what we're here to talk about today is not so much Darryl's fitness, but a little bit involved with some fitness, but also ALS. So Darryl, tell us a little bit about ALS.
In North America, most people know it as Lou Gehrig's disease, but the proper name is ALS, which is Amyotrophic Lateral Sclerosis. ALS is a degenerative neuromuscular disease that basically erodes your motor neurons over time and stops allowing signals to get through from your brain to your muscle, which causes the muscle attached to that motor neuron to atrophy and basically die off. So gradually you lose function of different muscles within your body until it basically shuts you out completely.
But your cognitive abilities, your brain, your psyche, your soul intact. Doesn't change, eh?
I've even heard it referred to as a glass coffin because your brain is completely intact, your body is completely shut down.
And there's, at this point in time, there's really no cure.
It's 100% uncurable and 100% untreatable as of today.
Okay.
There's a few drugs on the market that have been around for a while that can slow down the progression a little bit, maybe 3 to 6 months, but that's it.
That's it.
There's been nothing.
So, there's a couple of different forms, there's multiple forms, of course, right? But there's a couple of real different distinctions with regards to ALS. And could you maybe explain that a little bit for us?
One of the unique things about my ALS is that it's hereditary. It's caused by a genetic mutation to the SOD1 gene. Basically, I had a 50-50 chance of being born with the disease, with the gene mutation, which meant that at some point in my life I would develop ALS.
Now, this is a tough one, right? We've been training together for a long time. Like I said at the intro, 20 years we've known each other, and really full-time training together for 10, right? But you didn't know about this when we first met. You came, we worked together, just simply, like, we were both boxers, we were both fitness people, we were trying to stay in shape and stay young, and then halfway along that little journey, we found out more. Can you tell us a little bit about that too?
Ironically, being a hereditary disease for me, I didn't know anything about it until about 10 years ago. I'd heard of ALS, but I wasn't really familiar with it. I was like most people. It was just some rare disease that people got and you never really heard about. When I was a kid, I was adopted. When I was 41, I decided I wanted to find my birth family for health and medical reasons, primarily. So I began this search, and it took over the course of about a year, I was able to track down my birth mother. When I saw her for the first time, she was completely locked out with ALS. I didn't understand much about it, but that was sort of when I started really learning about this disease and how it's affected my family. From there, I learned that my grandfather had it, my uncle had it, my mother had it, and that it was a hereditary disease. I didn't think it was going to affect me. I wasn't concerned about it at the time. It wasn't until about 6 years ago when I had ankle surgery, which you remember, we spent the better part of the next year trying to do physio, trying to do electrotherapy, trying to find all kinds of different treatments to get the movement back into my ankle after the surgery, and it just wouldn't come back. Eventually that led me to see a neurologist. At that point, that's when they first diagnosed me with early onset ALS.
I remember, Dr. Gehrig, who I knew, who I trained him.
Yeah.
Right? I remember talking about that with you when we were talking, when he was like, no, you don't have ALS. It's not possible.
Yeah.
And then it was a couple things with your legs, and he took a step back.
Yeah, he did an EMG. He checked the nerve conductivity in my legs, and 20 minutes later, he looked at me and said, you got ALS.
Yeah.
Which is a really horrible experience.
Yeah.
I mean, it shakes you to the core.
Oh man, I know.
And moving forward for that, one of the things that you and I talked about was the importance of staying strong through this journey, because you don't know how fast you're going to progress. ALS can progress in as fast as 6 months or as long as 10 plus years, and nobody knows how they're going to progress on this journey, and everyone's journey is a little bit different. So it's really important for us to look at how to stay strong as possible, because under the thought that I'm going to need it at some point.
Yeah.
And so we focused on the muscles that were working, like my upper body, and we kept me as strong as possible.
When after you were diagnosed and we were talking about this and we were looking at physically what we could do for you, because your progression was such that it had started in your feet and it was slowly moving up your legs, which, like we talked about, everyone's journey is different with ALS. One of the first things we did back when you first discovered this was we worked on your balance, right? Like we worked on standing on one foot. We worked on just trying to maintain as much function as possible with your lower body. And what's interesting about ALS that we talked about was that there's some controversy of whether you should exercise or not, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's specific genetic forms of this disease where they have come out and said, do not exercise because you can, in a sense, speed up your progression because you're breaking down muscle fibers and rebuilding them in a body that doesn't necessarily rebuild muscle fibers.
Well, that's really it, right?
So you're essentially degrading yourself.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that we talked about with that potential risk was the real reward of the psychological benefits. Number one, you're dealing with a terminal disease that is, well, hideous, right? It's absolutely awful. And staying strong mentally in the face of that is just something that comes from knowing that you got up today and you went about your day just like every other day. Like, you are one of the strongest people I know, right? Like, and that's, well, you got a pretty darn good bench, strongest ALS patient in the world. But strong in the sense that, like, you just haven't succumbed, right? You're like, I'm going to Costco today. I'm like, dude, man, that's like running a marathon. But you're like, I'm going to Costco, right? Like, so that thing that comes from going about your day under the guise and hope of a potential treatment, which we can talk about in a minute, right? But it was just so important that you stay mentally strong, that you just stay, like, you knew that you were not giving in, right?
Well, one of the things I've noticed over time is, years ago, I worked out because I wanted to be strong. So there was a percentage of that was psychological and a percentage of that was physical. You feel better when you feel strong.
Absolutely.
As time has gone on, there's been a noticeable shift where the psychological component has almost become more important than the physical component.
For all of us.
It's absolutely important for me to get in here, for me to step over hurdles, for me to move some weights around, for me to keep my physical strength up. But psychologically, I'm doing something. Mm-hmm. I feel like I'm participating in my own fight against this disease. Absolutely. By being here, by being active, by trying to maintain as much of my use of my body as I can over time as it continues to degrade.
One of the things then, and that's interesting that you bring that up because like through the course of your journey, your upper body's been relatively unaffected. We're starting to get there a little bit now, and so we worked, like, you had a 400 bench press. We did some crazy stuff, right? We would show things on video that ALS patients aren't supposed to do. But we also showed the balance issues and the gait and the way that the way we had to really try to adjust the way you thought about moving, right?
Yeah, when you start to lose muscles in your legs, especially in your stabilizer muscles, your calves, your ankles, your toes. Toes are amazingly important for your balance, as we know, and losing, probably 50 to 70% of the use of my toes really affected the way I walked. And basically, I had to relearn how to walk using the muscles that were still functioning.
Absolutely.
In order to stay as mobile as possible. And that's what we did. We
set those hurdles up.
We stepped over stuff. We lifted stuff. We did stuff in the intent of trying to stay as mobile as possible and
for as long as possible.
And I don't know where I'd be on this journey without the exercise, but I do know over the last 4 years, psychologically, that's one of the factors that has helped keep me going.
Maintain a positive attitude just
Absolutely.
Because you keep working. Right?
We started out as a joke with the world's strongest ALS patient,
that was good.
And that became my hashtag. And then over time, I realized I just might be the world's strongest ALS patient.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you are.
And I mean, coming in here and throwing a few big weights on once in a while and moving them around, even though it may or may not be beneficial to me in the long run, psychologically, I walk out of here that day and I feel good.
Well, that's such an interesting point. There is a certainty that this disease is terminal. We know
Absolutely.
that, right? It is. And you could face the remainder of your life unhappy and sad, or you could get up every day and just try to do something, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. One of the key components of battling a disease like ALS is public awareness. Getting, putting a face and a voice to the disease. And that's something that I've really focused a lot of my efforts on in this battle. And I really there's been a big shift over the last few years with ALS. ALS used to be one of those diseases where people got it and you heard about it and then you never saw them again.
Unless they contacted you directly. Unless
it's someone who's a direct family member or a friend or someone, who you're interacting with your life. You don't hear about these people anymore. They just kind of disappear into the background. And that's kind of the way ALS has always been. People got sick, you heard about it, and then you never hear about them again. They end up crawling into a hole and dying. And there's been a major shift away from that over the last couple of years. Now people with ALS are coming forward. They're using social media. They're using public awareness. They're using all kinds of advertising campaigns to try to make people aware of what this disease is, make them understand, yes, ALS is a rare disease, but it's not as rare as people think. It affects 3,000 Canadians right now. Yeah. There's 1,000 people diagnosed in Canada every year and 1,000 people that die every year from
that's
ALS.
the thing. We're talking about rapid progression. We're talking about if you get a diagnosis, most of the time, like in your case, it's a little longer, and Stephen Hawking lasted forever, right? Yeah. But in general, it is a really rapidly progressing disorder.
Yeah, it has an average lifespan of 2 to 5 years post-diagnosis. Yeah. I mean, for most people, by the time they get diagnosed, because of the process of elimination you have to go through to get to that point, they have such a short window to really live that it affects you very hard psychologically.
Oh yeah, undoubtedly.
I mean, it knocks the wind
Unless it's happening to you, you just simply can't.
Yeah, it absolutely just knocks the wind right out of your sails. Yeah. The other thing that's really come up in the last couple of years is we're finally at a point in the treatment of this disease where we're starting to see real hope. There's drugs coming down the pipeline now. Some of it stemming back even to the research that came out of the Ice Bucket Challenge, 7 years ago, is now coming to fruition, where we have drugs that have the ability to potentially stop progression, treat symptoms, or even reverse some of the progression.
And that's amazing. When we talk about raising awareness, right, that is the point, is that the Ice Bucket Challenge was that thing where, it was cool to dump a bucket of ice on your head, right? I get it. But you raised a lot of money for research, for drug companies and for scientists and universities to really try to tackle this disease, right?
Well, and not just that. I mean, it put the words ALS into people's mouths. It put it at the forefront where people could actually look at it and understand what this disease is and how horrific it really is.
Absolutely. One of the things that we were talking about before when we talk about advocacy and just what we're trying to do with talking with you is, regardless of the progress we've seen, there still is so much governmental red tape, drug approvals, everyone's concerned, we're seeing with vaccine hesitancy and things like that right now too, where they're not sure, this could harm you. But in the case of an ALS patient, I'm gonna die, so why can't you give me the drug now?
Well, there's a few components to that. One is clinical trials. Patients want access to be able to be part of the machine for making change. And a big part of that is participating in clinical trials. Up until just recently, BC has not offered any clinical trials, so patients from British Columbia have had to fly to Montreal or Toronto in order to participate in anything, or even as far as the US. I've been part of a trial myself in Montreal, and I spent most of last summer at McGill University doing clinical trials.
With COVID.
Yeah, to get injected with a drug that no one else in the world's really been injected with. But that never triggered any fear in me. What it triggered was hope.
Yeah.
And hope that, hey, maybe this might not help me, but maybe it'll help the next generation of ALS patients. And that's really the mindset of where people are. Everybody wants to find a cure. Everybody wants to find treatment. Everybody wants to get better from this. But because of the acceptance process you go through when you're diagnosed with a disease like ALS, it really leads to people wanting to help others.
Yeah.
You know, you want your life, it becomes a point of you want your life to have meaning.
Yeah.
And if that meaning is that future generations of people that develop this disease, and in my case, especially being familial, I'm looking at an entire family of people who have a 50-50 chance of contracting this disease in their lifetime.
Do you know, I got to tell you, that's one of the things that I've seen in you, like, because as we discussed at the outset, right, we've known each other. We started doing this because, you know, we were old guys who wanted to keep boxing, right? We wanted to stay in shape. We wanted to do certain things, right? Be strong and stay young. And I've really seen you become an advocate. Like you, like really, you donate large sums of money and time to sort of like the advancement of a cure. You really work to raise awareness and to bring, like we were just talking about, the whole point of this, the whole idea is to bring some hope, right? Like it's, and in the past it was such a hopeless diagnosis. You were gonna die, that's all there was to it, right? And now, that might not happen.
Well, one of the things that's really come out of this in the last couple of years is my SOD1 version of ALS only represents 2% of ALS patients. There's 5 of us in British Columbia, maybe 500 in all of North America. But what it does have is it has a gene that they can target that is directly linked to ALS.
Yeah, it's a starting point.
It's a starting point.
Yeah.
And what they've used is mRNA technology. They're using AAV technology, adenovirus. They're using all these technologies to try to target that gene and either turn it off temporarily using mRNA or turn it off permanently using different technologies.
I mean, that's what's really interesting is what we're talking about. In the past, it was a grain of sand on the beach was the problem, right? Like there was just how do we get to this and what do we do and how we don't even understand the mechanism. And so when they have someone like yourself who has a certainty for it, then they're able to really target and find out what's going on and why.
And that's exactly what they've done. I mean, they've got a new drug called tofersen. It's specifically for SOD1 type ALS patients like me. And you got to ask yourself, well, if it's out there and they know it's working, why aren't I on it?
Well, that's the thing.
And that's the million-dollar question is, how do you get these drugs to the patients that need them when you have a mountain of red tape and bureaucracy to cut through with Health Canada, with the FDA? I mean, it's a 2 to 3 year process just to get a drug approval. And when you've got patients with a 2 to 3 year life expectancy,
I know.
That doesn't mesh.
No.
I mean, things need to happen faster.
And understanding that tofersen is there, I mean, there's a great deal of hope. We've been talking about this, like you have the potential to have something that will arrest it right now where it is. We've done all of this work over the last, 5 or 6 years, right? Like, and before that to try to maintain a function, to maintain life, right? And you're sitting there looking at it, right? It's got to be kind of a challenge, hey?
It's tough to sit back and take it when there's so much hope out there, and it's just it's just out of your reach at this point. Yeah. And it's people who are putting themselves out there, who are fighting for awareness and advocacy for this drug, that are pushing these drug companies now to look at early access programs, where they're going to allow patients to be on this drug ahead of FDA and Health Canada approval because they believe that it will help. Absolutely. And that's what's happening. And I mean, I'm waiting for that call that I'm eligible to go on this drug, just along with hundreds of other gene mutated ALS patients that share that same hope. Because we're looking at the people out there who are on it, and they're coming back to us and saying, I'm still working, I'm still running, I can climb a flight of stairs, I can play a round of golf, I can ice skate.
Chris Snow's
a great example. I mean, he can't tie his skates up anymore, but he can still hit the ice and put on his gloves.
The rate of his progression, he should have died 6-8 months ago.
Absolutely. He's 18 months now, I believe, into this journey, and he's still going.
Yeah.
You know, for people like me, that's a tremendous amount of hope.
Yeah.
You know, and then the hope that unlocking this form of ALS will open up, a plethora of different options for
For the sporadic
people
exactly.
who don't necessarily know why they ended up getting ALS in the first place.
But like we talked about, it's a starting point, right? And then, once you understand with awareness and advocacy and just pressure, right? Like, hopefully it gets more than just the 10%, right?
One of the things I've discovered is this: is change requires, or hope requires change.
Yeah.
And that change really is coming from groups like ALS Action Canada, and you've got your ALS societies like the ALS Society of BC, who are really pushing, who are patient. In the case of ALS Action, it's a patient-driven initiative. These are real people facing ALS every day that are writing letters to the government. They're making phone calls. They're going on news shows, doing articles. They're putting themselves on camera and talking openly about their disease with the hope that people will see that and they will recognize it and they will bring change.
Yeah, that we'll get some more funding. We'll get some more just real interest and funding and just more clinical studies like we talked about and faster access to drugs.
Absolutely.
I mean, if it's not an experiment, if you're not going to be here next year.
The end goal of this whole thing is getting drugs in patients' bodies.
Yeah.
Like that's, when they make the comment that people are dying waiting for this treatment, they're not kidding. That's 100% for real.
Yeah.
People are legitimately dying waiting to get any kind of treatment
that
may slow down their progression or halt it. I mean, this is it's not metaphorically speaking, we're dying waiting. It's
dying
legit,
waiting.
We are dying waiting for treatment.
Yeah.
And you have the government and you have drug companies. They need to get rid of the red tape. They need to get rid of the bureaucracy of the whole thing. Because if there's a treatment and you have a patient who has a 100% chance of dying from his disease, put them together.
Yeah. It's not an esoteric question. It's not like a debatable thing. This person is going to die in 6 months, 8 months, 2 months, right? And that drug could potentially save their life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's where the push needs to be.
Yeah.
And that's why people are putting their voices to this. People are putting their faces out there. People are sharing their journeys openly with ALS because they want to push for that kind of change.
Yeah.
And that's the future of ALS.
I agree. I mean, well, we talk about this all the time, but in the meantime, we're going to keep the 315 going.
In the meantime, it's pretty nice and you can still throw 315 on the bench and move it around.
Yeah, for now.
And psychologically, the effect that has for me is amazing.
Oh, and you've been doing that for a while now.
One of the big things I've learned through this journey is that strength is not always a physical attribute. I deal with people every day as part of ALS Action Canada and some of the other groups I belong to doing advocacy. These are some of the strongest people I've ever met in my life. They're unbelievable. And they can't lift their hand to feed themselves. They can't speak anymore. They're eating through feed tubes. They're confined to hospital beds. Yet they are some of the strongest people I have ever met in my life.
Yeah.
What they do to put themselves out there and to advocate for this disease is unbelievable. And you have to respect it.
Absolutely.
And I think it's really important that people see that. People understand the strength it takes to fight a disease like ALS isn't always about getting on the bench and throwing up 400 pounds.
No.
That's not even a real factor.
No.
It's getting up, it's getting yourself out of bed, it's getting yourself in a frame of mind where you're ready to fight this disease. And you're going to put yourself out there and do whatever you can within your power to make a change.
Well, my friend, you inspire me, man. I can't tell you how much I appreciate. We started this journey and it was about fitness and then it was about life. And I don't know what to say other than I am grateful to be your friend. And so how would you like to end this day?
Honestly, I think the best way to end this is, I think it's important that ALS goes from being a terminal disease to being a treatable disease, to being a manageable disease, to being a curable disease. I think that's going to take advocacy, that's going to take public awareness, that's going to take money, and that's going to take the government and drug companies to get faster approvals to get drugs into patients' bodies. I think that is the key to all of this.
Well, that's the goal, man. We'll talk soon.
Perfect.